When it comes to the lifespan of aquarium fish, most people don't consider much besides what the fish's lifespan is listed at. But there's actually many different factors that come into play, and there's certain things to do and avoid to extend their natural lifespan. The first thing you should know is to maintain a good amount of beneficial bacteria in the tank. A lot of people keep their fish without thinking too much about this aspect, but healthy beneficial bacteria is essentially the microscopic organisms that break down organic matter, fish waste, plant debris, and keep the entire aquarium healthy. These beneficial bacteria grow primarily on surfaces, so stuff like rocks and substrate, filter media. When you hear people talking about biological filtration, this is basically what they're talking about. Biological filter media can be added to canister filters, so some people use sponges or ceramic rings. What these things will do is they provide a large surface area for beneficial bacteria to colonize, and that beneficial bacteria is ultimately going to break down the harmful ammonia through the nitrogen cycle. Beneficial bacteria can be established in various different ways. I've already talked about the filter aspect of it. Like I said, they mainly grow on surfaces. The ones that are going to help the most are substrate and hardscape, rocks and wood, as well as botanicals, so leaf litter, guava leaves, Indian almond leaves. All of these things provide a surface area for bacteria to colonize, and with substrate, the deeper the substrate you have, the more area beneficial bacteria has to colonize on. So deep substrate tanks are usually more healthy in this aspect, and makes your tank healthy, as well as the creatures that live in there. If you're starting a new aquarium, you can use something like API Quick Start or Seachem Stability to help speed up the nitrogen cycle process. So it's very important to keep good beneficial bacteria. It's very healthy for the fish, it breaks down ammonia, also improves water quality by doing so. It's going to help create a stable ecosystem in general and help your fish live longer. This actually brings me to my second point, which is to not overclean. I know when a lot of people see something dirty on a rock or something, they just want to immediately take it out. Same goes with gravel vacuuming, like putting your siphon in there and disturbing the whole substrate. With aquarium fish, you want to try and keep the tank as balanced as possible if you want to extend their lifespan. You don't want to disturb everything in there all the time. When you're overcleaning and disturbing everything in the tank, what you're doing is essentially disrupting the natural habitats and the colonies of beneficial bacteria that are trying to thrive. So it's really important to try to mess with your aquarium as little as possible. Let the ecosystem do its own thing. Water changes are fine. If you need to change the water once a week, that's completely okay. With gravel vacuuming and stuff like that, if you want to keep your aquarium balanced, it's important to not mess with the substrate. The substrate provides tons of surface area for beneficial bacteria, and if you're gravel vacuuming, you're just going to disturb the whole thing, which obviously you don't want. The organic waste that builds up in the substrate helps the plants grow as well, especially the root feeders. That's also the reason why a lot of my tanks don't even rely on root tabs as much. It's because all the fish waste and stuff, organic debris, they fall down to the substrate, and the plants are just able to take the nutrients from there. So by not overcleaning and just letting nature do its thing, it's going to do a great deal in helping your fish live longer. A great way to not overclean your tank is to have live aquarium plants. This is the third thing that is going to help your aquarium fish live longer, is to keep live plants. I know I've said this in many videos, but keeping live aquarium plants is really going to help keep the entire ecosystem healthy. Plants are what's there in nature. Plants are things that keep the fish healthy in their natural habitat. They also take in a lot of ammonia and nitrates and help purify the water, and it's just a really nice thing to have. These are obviously the most natural filtration method. They also release oxygen into the water, so plants take the place of an air stone as well. In the wild, plants are the ones that balance out the entire ecosystem, and they really do a great job in doing the same to your aquarium. I think every fish tank should have plants in them. They really help create a balanced, stable ecosystem, and these are one of the most important things in keeping your fish alive for a long time. The next tip to help your aquarium fish live longer is to not keep the water temperature too high, preferably at the lower range. Now this mainly applies to live bearers such as guppies, platies, endlers, stuff like that. For cold water fish species such as celestial pearl danios, white cloud minnows, rainbow shiners, this is going to apply as well. But the idea here is that you don't want to keep the water temperature too high when you're keeping fish. Even if it's live bearers like guppies, like I said before, a higher water temperature is going to help them breed a lot. It's going to increase their metabolism, and what this does is it actually shortens their lifespan. If you keep guppies in a 75-degree Fahrenheit tank, they can probably live for 4 to 5 years, let's just say it. But if you keep them in a tank that's 82 degrees Fahrenheit for their entire lives, they might only be able to live a year or two. And this is just because the increased metabolism, it's going to reduce their lifespan by a lot. For cold water fish, you also don't want to keep them in water temperatures too high. Fish like white cloud minnows are cold water for a good reason. You normally want to keep them in the lower temperature side, which is what their natural habitat is like. Increased metabolic rates are going to lead to faster aging as it speeds up the biological process. Stuff like their activity and digestion. Again, this is especially true for live bears that breed a ton. So if you're keeping fish like guppies, I would not recommend keeping them over 80 degrees for too long. Maybe once in a while to mimic the summer temperatures, but definitely don't do it all the time. My next tip is to feed high quality foods in small amounts. So instead of feeding them in large portions, you want to feed in multiple smaller portions. So an example of this would be with flake food. You should feed no more than what they can consume in about a minute. Overfeeding is going to lead to various health issues such as fin rot, dropsy. It's also going to cause cloudy water and algae growth. Overfeeding is one of the most common reasons why beginner aquarium keepers can't keep their fish alive. It's a really common mistake, and you want to avoid this at all costs. Now, the other part of this was to feed high quality foods, and by that I mean stuff like protein and vegetables. You want to try to do your best to feed your fish a varied diet. So stuff like cucumbers, egg yolk, live daphnia, baby brine shrimp. Live foods like those are also great. They contain a lot of protein. Feeding your fish a healthy, varied diet is a big factor in helping your fish live longer. The next thing to help your aquarium fish live longer is to get a good tank size and to not overstock. Overstocking or getting a tank that's too small can often lead to all sorts of issues. A larger tank is going to be more stable and more healthy in general. When you think about it, in nature they have all this area of water that they live in. It's not just a small confined space. And so with aquariums, you want to try to give your fish as much space as you possibly can. Bigger tanks are much better in keeping the water quality stable. So for example, if you have a 5-gallon tank versus a 20-gallon, the 5-gallon is going to fluctuate much more easily than the 20-gallon, whether it's temperature or pH. You also want to avoid overstocking because the more fish that there are, the more waste there's going to be, which is going to lead to high ammonia nitrate. And even with regular water changes, the toxins are still going to build up. Your fish are likely not going to live as long if they live out their whole lives in an overcrowded tank. Overcrowding also leads to stress and aggression, and there's simply just a lack of space. My seventh advice would be to maintain a balanced ecosystem and to minimize sudden changes. This is kind of like a general tip, and it's just to avoid fluctuations in the water. If you want the fish to live for a long time, you have to keep everything stable. You don't want to change things too much, and you want to try to mimic the conditions that the fish have in their natural habitats. One thing you could do is to get a heater to avoid fluctuations in the water temperature. This is especially useful if you live in an area that's super cold or super hot. They're going to do a great job in keeping the temperature at a certain point. Another tip would be to avoid changing more than 25% of the water at a time. I would go with 25% max, because if you change too much, it's just going to create too big of an imbalance. Again, we want to keep everything steady. Larger water changes really disrupt that balance, and it does affect their overall well-being. And don't do it more than once a week. Again, that's just a general tip. Of course, if you have like a breeding tank or something that has a lot of bio load, then you of course want to do more than that if necessary. You also want to make sure to acclimate new fish to get them integrated into their new environment. For most fish, you probably don't need to drip acclimate, but at least put the bag in the water and slowly introduce them. Like I said in the beginning, always try to mess with your tank as little as possible. Many times, even if there are issues in the tank, such as plants not growing the way you want them to, if you just keep the conditions ideal and let them be, 9 times out of 10 the issue is going to resolve itself. I've seen this time and time again. The ecosystem always finds a way. I think it's safe to say stability is the greatest factor in keeping aquarium fish alive for a longer time. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you found these tips useful. If so, make sure to subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.